want to welcome you to this regular meeting of the Education and Neighborhoods Committee. I'm Councilmember Paul Krikorian. I know that Councilmember Dennis Zine is on his way to committee right now, but we're going to go ahead and get started at this time. And we have continued hearing of 4 motions before us. We began at the last meeting with a more thorough discussion of items 3 and 4. So I think I'd like to focus today on items 1 and 2 for further discussion. And Mr. Powell, if you could introduce item 1 first, we'll proceed.
Item number 1 is a motion Krikorian-Smith relative to requesting a report back with an implementation plan for a training program for neighborhood council board members that covers various topics, including 1, ethics and legal issues, including the Brown Act, Public Records Act, and conflicts of interest. Number 2, workplace violence and sexual harassment. Number 3, funding program. 4, city government basics. And 5, parliamentary process. And 6, community leadership.
Thank you. Now, I know everyone here knows this, but if you'd like to speak on this matter or any other agenda item, please fill out one of these speaker cards, and we'll be taking public comment that relates to anything other than an agendized item at the conclusion of our agenda items. So you may fill out a card for general public comment as well. So on item number 1, I'd like to ask Mr. Kim to come forward, please. Our General Manager of the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment, Mr. Kim, welcome.
Good afternoon.
I'd like to start off our discussion of this item on training, if I could, by asking you to give an overview of what the current training regimen is, whether mandatory or voluntary, whether done through the department or through any other agency. And if you can just give kind of a general overview of the current status of training, and in particular, also, what are the implications to neighborhood council members who perhaps don't participate in training that is required or would be beneficial? So if you could give that overview, that will be a good starting point for the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. B.H. Kim, General Manager, Department of Neighborhood Empowerment. Currently, the only legal mandate that neighborhood councils have to take training is the state ethics test, which is available online and which we provide face-to-face live training through our regional workshops. The trainings that the department has been providing have been one of the main functions of the department, and currently we've been conducting quarterly regional workshops. So every quarter we conduct trainings in 3 areas of the city. And currently our curriculum is kind of standing. We've been making a big push for ethics compliance. When I came into the department some 4 years ago, less than 20% of neighborhood councils were complying with the state law. I'm pleased to report that we're moving...
Sorry, just on that point, 20% of the councils or 20% of the individual board members?
Individual board members. Yes.
Sorry for my delay.
Not at all. I know you were working on pressing business. We've now been joined by the Honorable Councilmember Dennis Zine. Welcome. We just literally got started. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Councilman. We were just talking about your favorite subject, ethics.
Thank you.
So when I came in 4 years ago, the neighborhood council board members had less than 20% compliance rate. And I'm pleased to report that we're moving upwards of around 60% of the neighborhood councils. So the one thing that I've been doing, because there aren't consequences for not complying with the state law, that's a policy area that we need to address as a city. That I've been relying on transparency of data. So we recently posted a listing of every neighborhood council, all the board members, and who has not complied with the state ethics test. That has actually been moving the numbers pretty quickly. And I've also been following up with emails to all the board and neighborhood councils who have had less than 50% compliance. And at the last training that we provided, City Attorney Darren Martinez does a stellar job in providing a 2-hour training of the ethics test. We had over 100 people. in attendance. So I'm going to continue that, and I'm confident that we probably will move up to around 75% pretty soon, but nothing takes the place of consequences for meeting legal requirements. So,
well, and on the ethics component of it, the state mandated ethics training encompasses the Brown Act. It encompasses conflict of interest issues, contracting issues, Public Records Act.
Right.
There are state sanctions in place, are there not, for failure to comply? And the our own city ethics commission has additional administrative penalties that can be imposed that I would assume neighborhood council board members would be subject to if they aren't in compliance for that mandatory training. Would they not be?
Correct. This is where I would defer to the city attorney for the official status of neighborhood council board members.
Good afternoon. Deputy City Attorney Darren Martinez. One of the difficulties or concerns that arose, you're correct that the penalties, there are penalties that apply to city council elected officials, but that was done through our local ethics rules and laws. When neighborhood councils were exempted from the filing requirements of the Form 700 filing requirements, it took out a lot of the penalties that existed. So right now, it is a mandate, it is a requirement, they must comply, but the affirmative sanctions or penalties that can be imposed against individual board members are not present.
Correct.
Thank you.
So we have been making a big push, and as I was saying, I'm confident that we'll reach pretty good compliance level. In terms of the effect of not having consistent training for all the board members across the city, what we've been experiencing are when neighborhood councils run into difficulties is when people are not familiar with their bylaws, they're not familiar with what's expected of them from the city. It's not uncommon in the past, although we've been making the trainings more available, for board members to become active in their neighborhood council with absolutely no training whatsoever. The effect that it has at the neighborhood council level are that some people have had training, some people have had completely no training, and many neighborhood councils struggle because they don't know what's expected of them from the city in terms of legal requirements, as well as what a neighborhood council is designed to do for the city. So that is probably the most common cause of the department coming in to help with neighborhood councils that are struggling to perform their charter mandate, and which was why I would recommend that the city really look at a more systematic way of providing training to all currently seated and for future seated board members. I hear many concerns from neighborhood council board members about mandatory training, that it's a volunteer-driven system. They already spend a lot of time trying to make their neighborhood councils work, and I think we have to be able to work with that concern. For example, we're working on a volunteer training program where we could bring in neighborhood councils to provide the training themselves. At the regional level, we have a number of online videos that we could easily build up so that people can take it in the comfort of their own home, and how frequently they should be required to take a certain number of courses or segments. That's a question that I think the city has to decide on, but I think that if we can find the right balance between getting people enough information so that all the board members are on the same page in terms of the rules of engagement, that we can expect neighborhood councils to perform much more consistently across the city.
And you know, I'm very sensitive to not wanting to overburden members of our neighborhood council boards who are already devoting so much time and energy to service to the city for no compensation and working very hard for their communities. The other side of that is that there are significant potential liabilities that can arise from lack of training, both for the city and for the individual board members. And I think it's a little unfair to put people in a position of putting them in charge of a Brown Act committee without sufficient training to know, for example, what kind of personal liability they may face for Brown Act violations, in addition to exposure that the city might have for any one of a number of different kinds of potential issues. And that's why the motion attempted to encompass the areas of training that would potentially include liability arising out of a failure to meet those requirements. But there are other aspects of it on parliamentary process and community leadership that are just designed to make the neighborhood councils more effective as well. Are there areas, the current motion, the motion's current language encompasses training in ethics and legal issues, workplace violence and sexual harassment, again, a potential liability issue there, the funding program, city government basics, parliamentary process, and community leadership. Are there other areas of training that you frequently have to address in the department that you think would appropriately be included in this, or does this encompass the principal areas of principal problem areas that you've seen?
I think the subject matter areas really does encompass the core of the most frequent knowledge gaps that we have with the neighborhood councils, both from the perspective of liability to the city, as well as what neighborhood councils need to operate effectively as independent, semi-independent entities on behalf of the city.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Zine, any comments or questions?
No, you've covered it. What about a suspension of their participation? Has that ever been explored?
If I were to recommend a policy for the city, I think it would be that. A lot of neighborhood councils say that it's not right for stakeholder elected representatives to be deprived of, to be unseated, for example.
Well, not unseated, but you're suspended from voting. You can participate. You can attend the meeting. You're in the audience.
Right.
You're no longer an active participant.
Right.
And see, here's the concern I have. You got rules. You got the Brown Act, the Ethics Commission. You got all these rules and regulations. And if you follow them, everything's great. I got an email, which I need to share with you, about a neighborhood council where one of the commissioners sent me an email very concerned about a specific neighborhood council is having a lot of problems. You may know about it. I don't know if you do, but I'm going to share that with you. I do know about it. It's my job to know about it. No doubt about it. Well, they informed me. They wanted to tell me about it. So, oh, interesting. But there doesn't seem any consequence. So you can still attend the meeting, but instead of participating and voting, you're going to be out there in the audience, and you want to make a public comment, but you would be suspended for a period of time until you come to compliance.
Right.
And I think if you do that, there's some consequences, and at the same time, they're not disrupting the meeting. They're getting in compliance. I mean, you've done everything you can to try and bring them into compliance. And if there's violations, then the city, in essence, is going to be held responsible and liable. As you know, Mr. City Attorney, they are an entity of the City of Los Angeles. So I think if that were to take place, you're not terminated. You're just in a suspended mode. You can't vote. You can attend the meeting, but you can't participate as an active participant.
Right.
And you're not censured. It's just, and you get in compliance, then you can come back in the fold. Because you can't have it both ways. Okay, you're volunteer, you're not getting paid, and you don't want to follow the rules. You want to do what you want to do, and then it becomes disruptive. So I think if some kind of plan were to be implemented, you said if 75% want to take the classes and understand, what about the other 25% that don't want to participate and they're resistant? Yeah, I'm there. You're volunteering. We understand that, but it's your community also that you care about, and if you didn't care about it, you wouldn't be volunteering. So I think if something like that were to come about, you're not kicking them off the board, not removing them, but just to say, until you come in compliance, you're not going to be able to vote, and you will attend the meeting, but you won't be a participant with the rest of the board members who are in compliance.
I think that's the right direction to move in. Whenever I look at policies for the city, I try to adopt the best practices that neighborhood councils have figured out on their own to address the very concerns that we have. There are a number of neighborhood councils that have actually adopted such language in their bylaws where their voting rights are suspended until they meet certain training requirements.
Otherwise, there's no incentive to do the training requirements,
Right.
no matter how hard you try.
And some neighborhood councils focus specifically on land use and funding.
And land use is a big deal.
And I think it's an important point that a neighborhood council could itself face consequences if some minority of that board fails in their responsibilities because they didn't have proper training. And so even though you have a majority of people in full compliance, doing good work for the community, one person who makes a mistake because they didn't have the right training could put the good work of that majority at risk. So,
correct. And I would point out that currently the city policy is lacking in terms of consequences for individual board members. There's nothing in city ordinances that allows for sanctions against individuals.
So this motion calls for a report for a training regimen which would include a defined process for sanctioning board members who fail to complete the required training. Part of that report, I think, should include the suggestion that Mr. Zine made, and as well as other options for how to make this enforceable.
That's fine.
Okay. Then what I'd like to do is take public comment on this item now, and we have 2 cards on item 1. Our first speaker will be Ms. Ida Talala, I'm sorry. Welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Ida Talala, and I'm a volunteer and an activist in my community. I have also served on the Greater Echo Park Aleutian Neighborhood Council, and for most of my time, I could not vote, even though I took the training early, and I was suspended from voting with no written notice and without any board input. I complained to the city attorney's office. I complained to Dunn. I screamed. It didn't make a difference. And I was serving my community. It was denied because they had lost the code of ethics, which I signed. They admitted later they lost it. If they lost it, then I shouldn't be penalized, but I was, and nothing was done. There has to be major changes, and Dunn's management style of indifference has to end now. It really does. And this sugarcoating volunteer responsibility is irresponsible. When you volunteer for something, you step up to serve your community professionally to the best of your ability. You take the test within 2 months, period. You're given a year to think it over. Train them in a pre-candidate training. Tell them, you are in for this training, 5 hours, 2 sessions, 2 Saturdays. Here are your options. Do it or leave. Period. Stop sugarcoating things. The reckless behavior of neighborhood councils has to be deterred and changed, and Dunn's indifference also. I am appalled. I have a lot more to say.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Glenn Bailey, and as Mr. Bailey's coming up, obviously we, as part of a training regimen, will have to have procedures in place to ensure that that kind of thing doesn't happen, that we have accountability and record keeping in place that will make this an effective system. Mr. Bailey, welcome.
Thank you. Council members, some neighborhood councils that are at 100% of their ethics training, and they should be recognized and appreciated. There's obviously others that are less. I would like to commend General Manager Kim on his initiative that did draw 100 people to the Van Nuys training last month. I was there. It was, and I think, frankly, it should be done for everyone. Whether you're less than 50% or less than 100%, I think everyone should be told, get to the training. I agree, frankly, that there should be sanctions when it comes to things that there could be legal liability for the city, planning and land use, and also the funding, financial matters. That persons who haven't taken the ethics training should not be allowed to vote. I wouldn't go as far as putting them in the audience. They're still a board member. But I would say you can't vote on planning and land use and funding things. Also, I think that there probably should be some Neighborhood Council 101, maybe a requirement, not the same level of ethics and the Brown Act and public records. Those are things that can get the individual and the city in deep trouble if they're violated. But I do think that knowing the funding program, all board members have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that the money the city allocates to the neighborhood councils is spent properly and follows the rules of the city. And I wouldn't put it the same punitive, if you will, level, but I think that maybe part of this report back by the department, and incidentally, I support this motion, I support these report backs, but I think part of maybe what the department could give a recommendation or some thought to is how we can elevate the awareness and compliance of all board members, or to make sure that the council as a whole complies with the funding rules that is designated by the city. It shouldn't just be up to just the treasurer. If all eyes are on it and they're all trained in some minimal way, I think that's a good thing.
Thank you. And the motion does call for training on the funding program on city government basics, which I think addresses the issue you have, Mr. Bailey, parliamentary process and community leadership. So I would share that vision for what the report back will be. And Mr. Zine, if you don't have any...
Just one comment on Mr. Bailey's testimony on this matter. I think if we are going to be serious about compliance, while we're saying land use issues and budget issues, there are other issues that are important to neighborhood councils. And if they're not going to comply, I don't see why they would be sitting as a member. Welcome to be in the audience, but not as a member of that board at that particular time until they come in compliance. It's going to be, they're going to have a comment, they're going to have this, they have the presence of being part of it, when in fact they're in a suspended mode. So I think we need to separate the two. If you're in compliance, fine. If you're not in compliance, you're welcome to attend, stay in the audience, but you're not going to be sitting on the board until you come in compliance, because it's more than just the financial aspect and more than just the planning issues. There's a lot of other issues that come into play that we don't want to give a false impression. And there's got to be consequences, again, for not complying with the rules that are part of the protection of them, their neighborhood council, and the city. So I would think that we need to broaden it farther than a wider spectrum than just the budget and planning issues. And
as the department works on preparing its report back to this committee, those are the sorts of nuances that I hope will be evaluated to make this effective. And with that, I'd like to move that we advance this motion to the council for consideration and approve with a recommendation of approval of the motion. Very well. Seconded by Mr. Zine. And that will be the ruling of this committee. So that brings us to item number 2. Mr. Powell?
Yes. Item number 2 is a motion for Krikorian Smith relative to requesting a report back with an implementation plan for a system of regional complaint panels composed of board members of various neighborhood councils that will convene to address stakeholder and board member grievances as needed and by request of the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment and related matters.
And Mr. Kim, if you could join us again for this.
You should kind of like stay in that seat permanent.
I am permanent.
I know you're permanent right now.
If you could, Mr. Kim, start by giving us an overview of the current system for hearing grievances. How does the department address it when there are either internal grievances within a council or grievances between councils? How does the department currently deal with those situations?
I think this is one area of the citywide plan for neighborhood councils that wasn't thought out as well as it could have been. Really, the current ordinance is written such that there is a difference between a grievance and a complaint, which gets kind of confusing even for me. I defer to the city attorney sometimes. A grievance is to a neighborhood council, and the neighborhood council is required to follow their procedures in their bylaws, as well as in the citywide ordinance of neighborhood councils to address the grievance. One of the weaknesses there, obviously, when a complainant goes to a neighborhood council, they question whether the people who are hearing the grievance, is it fair for them if they are the subject of the grievance? So the best practices of some neighborhood councils is to appoint independent parties to a third kind of neutral entity that can hear the grievance and then issue the resolution. If there isn't satisfaction at that level is where it gets a little gray. It comes to the department as a complaint. Our authority is fairly limited. Our main authority as a city department with neighborhood councils is related to the public funding program. But then even then, the sanctions or the remedies that we could use for neighborhood councils are pretty narrowly confined around the misuse of public funds. Doesn't address the most often common grievances that neighborhood councils get. There's also the city attorney could also weigh in on this, but there are certain restrictions about the kind of grievances that stakeholders can issue with neighborhood councils if they're of a legal matter, if they're regarding Brown Act violations. It's out of the city's immediate jurisdiction, and as well as neighborhood councils. So it's been a long-standing problem, and we've had some number of work groups. In fact, the Neighborhood Council Review Commission had issued some recommendations for a grievance process, but that ultimately results in the need for a city ordinance to address what is the ultimate authority figure for resolution of a grievance. Right now, it's kind of gray. So one of the things that I would be looking for in terms of report back to the city council would be a way, one is to collapse both a grievance and a complaint into one streamlined process that would be issued to a body of peers of neighborhood councils. And I think this would be a good tie-in to the other motion that you have around regional governance, that we could easily wrap in a grievance process into a regional structure of neighborhood councils where peers would be the first to hear of a grievance or a complaint that they weren't if they weren't satisfied, it wasn't satisfactorily addressed at the neighborhood council level. They would hear it. They would issue recommendations to the department. The department would be given certain authorities to pursue the recommendation, and if after a certain time period, maybe 2 months, 3 months, there has been no response to the neighborhood council, then that would trigger steps towards decertification. So quicker resolution to these issues in terms of whether neighborhood councils are being accountable to their stakeholders as well as to the city, and real consequences for neighborhood councils who are not following the procedures, I think would be a very effective remedy to address the lingering issue of when grievances aren't resolved. It does tend to affect the morale of board members as well as community members when their grievances haven't been heard in a just way.
Yeah, and the other side of that coin, of course, is that grievances that are without merit, for example, that continue to keep lingering, it hangs over the head of neighborhood councils and their board members and interferes with morale and takes up time and takes up, I'm sure, an enormous amount of your department's time as well if we don't get prompt resolution of these matters.
That's fine.
Mr. Zine?
No comment on that. It's good.
All right, we have 2 cards on this matter as well, so I'd like to ask Ms. Talala to come up again first, followed by Mr. Bailey.
Thank you. I am concerned that so few of the neighborhood councils are here when the issue is so important. I think that basically the grievance procedures do not exist and make a mockery of the democratic process. The aggressor, the neighborhood council, selects the committee to serve. What justice is there? There are lots of issues which are technical and legal that require a legal background. We need the city attorney there. When they break their bylaws and they do not keep the Brown Act, that is absolutely needed. We also need somebody outside who has a grassroots background and understands the issues. We need an independent and like a parliamentarian who understands all the core issues. Dunn has never taken this seriously. Decertification has to be a must. You are looking at giving all the groups, irregardless of whether they perform or not, with the same amount of money. You also do not, there's an unevenness in handling. You pat them on the back and the next year they get the same amount. What incentive is there? Decertification has to be on the ballot. So has recall. You need to have your elections. Otherwise, nobody will take you seriously. The lack of skills and the disregard and disrespect that neighborhood councils have for the grievance process has to be addressed. Our Greater Echo Park Alicia Neighborhood Council was found out that they weren't serving the majority Hispanic community. They asked that agendas, minutes, and a translator, and the bylaws translated, all in Spanish. It has never been done. The first claim was there's no money, but they've had 2 funding cycles, and there hasn't been any money, but you give 25% to events, block parties. I think there has to be justice. And this process needs to be examined, explored from 3 points of view. The Dunn, the city attorney's office, and from the stakeholders' viewpoint, plus the board. I would beg this committee to take this matter seriously. Otherwise, stakeholders are not served, and there is no penalty. Please. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bailey.
Good afternoon again. I support this motion also. Just a couple thoughts. A number of years ago, one of the active homeowner groups in Encino filed a grievance against the neighborhood council. And the problem is that it was referred to a committee and then they stonewalled it. So I think that this, in other words, it never got acted on. Now it happens that homeowners association has a representative on the neighborhood council, and so there's a little bit of maybe more complicated than just a stakeholder not associated with the neighborhood council doing things. But there's a couple thoughts I just wanted to say. First of all, the regional panels would sort of help us get away from the problem of finding a stakeholder that has no connection at all to community, having it within the region. And in the template, I believe this came from the template for the revision of the bylaws, the language was that the board shall then refer the matter to an ad hoc grievance panel comprised of 5 stakeholders and fill in the blank, in our case it's South Valley Planning Area, who are randomly selected by the board secretary from a list of volunteers who have previously expressed an interest in serving from time to time on such a grievance panel. The secretary will coordinate a time and place for the panel to meet with the person submitting a grievance to discuss ways in which the dispute may be resolved. So it is still dependent on an officer of the neighborhood council, the secretary, but having it in the bylaws, having it having as an area planning group would involve multiple different folks from multiple different neighborhood councils that would hopefully not have the connection at stake in that sort of thing. So I think that's it then. Thanks.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Zine, any other comments on this matter?
No.
All right, then I'd like to move that we advance this motion to council with a recommendation of approval.
Yes.
And that is the unanimous vote of this committee. Now, we have public comment next, but if there's anybody who would like to comment on items 3 and 4, we did continue those matters from the last meeting. I have one card so far on item number 3, but if anyone else would like to submit a comment card, please do so now. And it would be my thought that we had fairly thorough discussion about items 3 and 4 at the last meeting of this committee. Motions have been pending for some time now. There's been an opportunity for comment on my policy blog and otherwise. But if anybody would like to comment now, I don't think we need further report from you, Mr. Kim, on those matters. So I would like to go directly to public comment on those matters. And the one card that I have so far is Ms. Talala on item number 3.
Thank you. I think the structure of
I'm sorry, forgive me. Before you begin on that, I guess we do need to introduce what item number 3 is for those who are listening. So, Mr. Powell, if you could please do so.
Motion Krikorian and Koretz relative to requesting a report back with a plan to implement in the next budget year a structure of governance and administration that provides greater autonomy and self-governance for neighborhood councils and reduces the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment's workload and related matters.
Thank you. Ms. Talala.
Thank you. I'm very concerned about this autonomy and the lack of done to be involved. Neighborhood councils are a governing body. They're an extension of city government, as you all have said. They have to then behave accordingly. And you really need to look at this because in many cases the ethics training is inadequate. That Form 700 was draconian because it required your financial information mainly, which does not impact on a neighborhood council. However, there is another ethics issue. When 4 members of the neighborhood council are on a board of a community organization, do not recuse themselves and vote to award monies to that organization. And they look at you when you say, aren't you on the board? Oh, yes, but we don't receive a penny, so it's okay. And we have had this repeatedly, husbands and wives voting for each other's projects. We have a neighborhood council president who has entirely worked the entire year's budget by himself and got the board to approve it. What justice is there? What budgetary inclusion, is there? Where was the participation? Only those items listed there of groups that he had selected are going to be funded. Oh, there's talk, this is only an allocation. But it's not true, because we just had our past meeting, and those who were allocated got their funding. This cannot continue. Thank you.
Thank you. I also have a card from Mr. Bailey on item number 3. Mr. Bailey?
Thank you, Glenn Bailey. Since I'm on the Valley Alliance Neighborhood Council Executive Board, I could not comment on this since I wasn't here when you considered it before. The regional approach, I think there's a lot of things that we could both take workload from done, and it includes mentoring, training, other things. In the Valley Alliance, there are 34 certified neighborhood councils. I know there's been some discussion that that's too many, but we actually work pretty well together. When we have our forums at the CBS studios, I believe you've been there, we've approached, we didn't have 100% attendance, but we were pretty darn close of the 34 neighborhood councils. So I think that one of the things I would hope could be asked in the report back is to look at the alliances that may be more regional, like the Valley, and not so much have to be determined by the planning areas, which is an artificial lines, somewhat artificial. For the Valley, it's down Roscoe Boulevard. and it divides some neighborhood councils. So, I just hope that could be looked at. I hope there wouldn't be an arbitrary number that just because maybe the harbor has an alliance with, 8 members and it works well for them, that there's no reason that maybe the valley can't have a similar type thing. So anyway, the alliances. The other thing I want to ask is if Dunn could maybe look at the areas where we need to put some extra effort in creating alliances where there aren't now in existence, that are not high functioning or maybe not functioning at all. So that really the goal would be to have, just as the goal is to have 100% coverage of neighborhood councils within the city, that we'd have 100% coverages of alliances. Thank you.
Thank you, and I do want to seize the opportunity to thank Vank for some really important, productive work on developing this concept of regionalization, and it's been a real pleasure to work closely with the leadership of Vank in developing this motion. I think just a brief comment in response, Mr. Bailey, on the issue of the alliances. Moving forward with a regionalization approach doesn't necessarily mean that will be in lockstep with the current structure of the alliances. I think that's a rough model, but how we end up on that will depend very much on the options that are presented to us when the department reports back. So, thank you. Mr. Zine, any comments on this matter?
The greater autonomy, self-governance, and along with that comes the responsibility of following the rules. So while we say reduce the workload and related matters for the Department of Empowerment, if we proceed in that direction of greater autonomy and self-governance, then it's clear and important that we have the rules and consequences when they don't follow, since we're going to give them more autonomy, more self-reliance and control without the oversight to a greater degree, which is more compelling when you go into that arena to say that you've got to have the rules, and if you don't follow the rules, these are the consequences. So everyone will know the rules and the consequences if you don't follow the rules, to avoid additional problems, as we know, and I need to see you when the meeting's over about the issues that have been brought up to me. Thank you.
And thank you. With those comments, we've heard public comment on this at the last meeting here. We've had an opportunity to consider this motion. I'm prepared to move it forward to council.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Zine. That's the unanimous vote of this committee. And that brings us to item number 4.
Item number 4 is a motion, Krikorian-Koretz, relative to requesting report backs and adopting policies in regards to the Neighborhood Council's funding program, including the use of budget and reconciliation templates, a prescribed accounting system, rollover of funds, equipment purchases, development of an electric system for neighborhood funding program, and related matters. Also, this item has been referred to the Budget and Finance Committee.
Thank you. I currently don't have any cards on this matter, and that's that on item number 4. All right.
Don't rush up at once.
Thank you. All right, so we do have one card on item number 4, and that is Mr. Goldfarb. Craig Goldfarb, if you could come forward, please.
Hello. I'm a treasurer for Northwest San Pedro Neighborhood Council. I'm also a budget advocate for the Harbor region. I've wondered what took so long for number 4 to happen, since I met with Dunn 3 years ago, and most of this were things that, as a neighborhood council, but neighborhood council treasurers recommended that we implement. I just wanted to comment generally on the other 3 measures and stuff. I don't think you need to be punitive with this. We are adults. You need to be proactive. Most of the neighborhood councils do their jobs and know what they're doing. The things that Dunn needs to recommend need to be done in conjunction with committees from neighborhood councils. We know what's going on more so than Dunn does. They need to be relevant to the mission of neighborhood councils. A lot of the stuff that comes out of Dunn just doesn't happen that way. And I have problems with depriving citizens of the right to vote, whether they're elected officials or not. And that's a lot of the things that I see going on.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. Again, item number 4 was discussed at the last meeting, and I'd be prepared to move it forward to council if that meets with your approval, Mr. Zine.
Well, just a couple comments regarding the comments from the last speaker on this particular matter. We're talking about, and I don't know if he's familiar with all the situations that I become familiar with, budget, reconciliation of templates, accounting systems, rollover of funds, equipment purchase, development electronic system. While it's true that the vast majority are adults, I believe in being proactive. But if we look at the history, we know that some people have been indicted, some people have been incarcerated, and it doesn't take a lot of people to destroy a system that is designed to help benefit the community. And as far as the right to vote, you have an obligation to follow the rules. And if you don't follow the rules, then certain people who come involved in something negative may not have the right to vote. So I would question the fact is history has shown us in the last 10 years we've had some issues, we've had some problems, we've had some scandals, and it's our job as elected officials to make sure that these taxpayer dollars and these organizations run in a positive fashion. And when I receive a confidential correspondence from an individual of a community saying that a neighborhood council is ready to implode with adults, it troubles me. And it troubles me to the point that we need to have consequences so we don't have a system that's designed to benefit a community fall apart and disintegrate. There has been a history of problems, and what Mr. Krikorian, our chair, is trying to do is make sure those problems don't reoccur and we can continue running this in a positive fashion. So due respect to those that are following the rules and complying, and those that aren't are causing this situation to have more scrutiny and a tightening of the regulations so everyone's running the same page. I just want to add that from the last comments. But I would support your recommendation moving forward.
Thank you very much. So that will be the unanimous vote of this committee. So we'll be moving forward with all 4 of the motions to council, all by unanimous vote. Thank you, Mr. Zine. I need to step out to make an emergency phone call. If you could, Mr. Zine, just take over.
General public comment?
General public comment. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ida Talala, public comment, ma'am.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I'm hopeful for the neighborhood council system if the 4 motions before you are put into place and put into place with a timeline. It's very important to hold Dunn accountable to a timeline. It is very important to hold Bonk to timelines. Otherwise, they are flexible and it leaves communities bewildered. We are currently in the Greater Echo Park Aleutian Neighborhood Council bewildered by the system. After all that money that has been spent, approximately only 2 people go to the meetings, both of whom are appalled with the situation. We have appealed to Dunn, and it does not work. Who do we appeal to? City attorney says, go to your neighborhood council. This runaround has to end because the system is not strengthened by this. So I plead with you to keep all of us appraised of the timelines, keep all of us informed, and to have systems in place that are fair and transparent. That is all stakeholders are asking. Fair and transparent and equitable distribution of the monies. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. And with that, if there's nothing further, Mr. Powell, this meeting is adjourned.